The north wind had no respect. It blew across the borderlands of Wyoming and Montana with a dry rasp, carrying the taste of dust and distance. The year was 1883, and the season was a brittle autumn. The sky was a hard, vacant blue, and the sun offered light but no warmth. Daniel Two Moons, called Red Hawk by some and just Daniel by the few he trusted, felt the wind push against his shoulders. He sat tall on his buckskin mare, his gaze sweeping the horizon. He was a man made of the same elements as the land around him, patient, weathered, and quiet. His eyes, dark and clear, missed nothing. They saw the ripple of the cured grass, the distant flight of a lone hawk, and the unnatural straight line of smoke far to the east. That smoke was not from a cook fire. It was the breath of the engine, the iron horse that Elias Shaw was pushing into the high valleys. He was escorting the postal wagon, a heavy, dust-caked vehicle pulled by 4 tired mules. The driver, a man named Silas, coughed into his sleeve, the sound dry and hacking. Daniel rode ahead, his rifle resting easy in the scabbard by his knee. He was a freelance guide, a protector of the mail route. It was honest work. It kept him moving, and it kept him close to the changing currents of the territory. He was Northern Cheyenne. He had been a warrior, and he had been a soldier, wearing the blue coat of the Scouts. Now he was just a man trying to find a balance on ground that was shifting beneath his feet. A pale, old scar marked his jaw, a thin white line that pulled tight when he set his mind to something. He was thinking of Willow Draw, the valley his people had been given by treaty and were now being starved out of by drought. The wind carried more than dust. It carried the smell of coal smoke, a scent that did not belong here. It was a greasy, industrial smell that clung to the air, a promise of what was coming. The railroad. Elias Shaw Rail and Cattle. The two were one and the same. Shaw built the tracks, and his cattle ate the grass, and his money bought the politicians. He promised progress, but it looked like conquest to Daniel. His mare snorted. Tossing her head, Daniel reached forward, rubbing the tense muscle in her neck. He spoke to her softly, not in English, but in the flowing sounds of his own people. He promised her water, though water was the problem. The creeks were low, the earth cracked and white with alkali. The drought was a weapon, more effective than any rifle. The great herds of bison were ghosts, and the people at Willow Draw waited, their bellies tight, while men in dusty suits argued over maps in Cheyenne. They said Shaw wanted the valley, not for the grass, but for the route, and for the water. There was a rumor, a whisper that traveled from the saloons to the army posts. It was a whisper about water, a map of springs hidden from the sun, a network of underground life that could make the high desert bloom, the hidden water map. To control that water was to control everything. It meant life for cattle, it meant power for the railroad, and it meant the end of Willow Draw. Daniel tasted the grit between his teeth. He turned his horse, signaling Silas to keep the mules moving. The town of Red Butte was 2 miles ahead, a collection of raw lumber and false fronts huddled against the wind. It was a place of new beginnings and quick endings. For Daniel, it was just a place to deliver the mail and listen. The stagecoach from St. Louis was several hours behind the mail wagon, and it carried a different kind of passenger. Eliza Hart sat braced against the hard seat, her hands clutching the leather strap as the coach jolted over a dry wash. She was 24 years old, and she felt 1,000 miles from home. Her gray traveling dress was practical and plain, her hair pinned back so tightly it made her temples ache. It was the costume of a governess, a respectable woman traveling west to teach the children of a wealthy rancher. The costume was a lie. Eliza Hart was a teacher, but she was also a freelance reporter. In the sturdy carpet bag at her feet, beneath the spare clothing and the books on Latin and arithmetic, lay a small, heavy box camera and a leather-bound notebook. She was here to investigate Elias Shaw, back east. He was praised as a visionary, a man taming the Wild West for the good of the public. But letters had reached St. Lewis, letters smuggled out by disgruntled surveyors and frightened homesteaders. Speaking of broken contracts, forced land sales, and violence dressed up as accidents. She was here to find the truth, and she was terrified, not of the land, which was so vast it frightened her, but of the men who sought to control it. She clutched the notebook in her lap. It contained her purpose. It contained the questions she needed to ask. Her gaze fell on the wooden camera box. It was her only weapon. A photograph did not lie. It could capture the truth in silver and light. It could show the world what was happening in this empty, wind-scoured place. The coach crested a rise, and the town appeared below them. Red Butte. It was not impressive. It was a scar, raw and new. On the brown skin of the prairie, a cluster of buildings, a wide street thick with dust. She could see the lettering on the side of the general store, faded but clear Shaw rail and cattle. His name was on the new water troughs, on the land office, on the freight depot. He owned the town, just as he seemed to own the wind. Eliza took a steadying breath, the dry air scratching her throat. She was alone. She was pretending to be someone else. But she remembered the words of her editor in St. Louis. The truth does not dig itself up. You must be the shovel. When the stagecoach groaned to a stop, Eliza gathered her things. She stepped down into the dust, pulling her bonnet tight against the persistent wind. The town was loud. Men shouted, wagons rumbled, and from a long, low building with swinging doors came the tinny sound of a piano. Daniel had already delivered his pouches to the postmaster. He was tying his mare to the rail outside the mercantile when the stage arrived. He watched the passengers descend, a drummer with a hopeful smile, 2 miners covered in grime, and then the woman. He recognized her type instantly. Eastern. She wore the wrong clothes, her boots too thin for the mud or the dust. She moved with a stiff spine, her eyes wide, trying to see everything at once. She looked like a bird that had flown into the wrong sky. She was carrying a heavy satchel and another box, a polished wooden one that he did not recognize. She looked vulnerable, and in Daniel's experience, vulnerable things did not last long in Red Butte. He watched her for a moment longer. She was pretending not to be overwhelmed, pulling on a pair of neat gloves as if she were in a St. Louis parlor. He saw the way she looked at the Shaw rail and cattle sign, a flicker in her eyes. Too quick to be simple curiosity. It was interest, or it was fear. He was not sure which. He turned away. It was not his concern. He had his own responsibilities. Eliza secured a room at the town's only hotel, a flimsy structure that smelled of stale beer and fried bacon. The room was small, the window looking out over a littered alley. She locked the door, a flimsy latch that gave her no comfort. She unpacked her camera first, checking the glass plates, her movements careful and practiced. Then, the notebook. She sat on the lumpy mattress and began to write, her pencil flying across the page. She described the town, the dominance of Shaw's name, the taste of the air. She described the other passengers. And she described the man she had seen at the mercantile, the native guide. He was tall, leaner than the broad-shouldered settlers, and moved with a grace that seemed out of place among the stumbling, heavy-booted men. He had a scar on his jaw. He had watched her, his expression unreadable, before turning away. He was part of the land, she wrote, not just on it. Down in the saloon, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of whiskey. Silas, the mail driver, was nursing a beer, telling a story to a few of the local stockmen. One of them, a man with a sprawling red beard, lowered his voice. He said the drought was Shaw's best friend. He said the Northern Cheyenne at Willow Draw were getting ready to sell their water rights for flour and beef. Another man, older, spat tobacco juice onto the floor. He said it was not the treaty water Shaw wanted. It was the other water, the hidden water. The red-bearded man laughed. The hidden water map, a ghost story. It is not a ghost story, the older man said, his voice dropping. He said he knew a surveyor who had worked for Shaw, A man who had seen drawings, springs that never ran dry, enough water to run a railroad and feed 1,000,000 head of cattle. He said the surveyor was dead now, a riding accident near the Willow Draw boundary. The saloon grew quiet for a beat, the men looking at their drinks. The piano player, sensing the mood, started a livelier tune. Outside, the wind picked up as the sun began to dip, painting the hard blue sky with streaks of orange and violet. The town hunkered down for the night. Smoke rose from chimneys, thin and gray, dissolving instantly into the vast, darkening sky. Eliza stood at her small window, watching the alley fill with shadows. She felt the weight of the secrets around her, heavy as the box camera in her bag. The story was here. It was dangerous, and it was tangled up in the land, the railroad, and the desperate need for water. Miles away, clear of the town's smell and noise, Daniel Two Moons sat by his own small fire. He was not in Willow Draw, but he faced it, watching the last light fade from the sacred hills. He ate his jerky slowly, listening to the night sounds. He heard the wind, the call of a distant coyote, the soft stamp of his mare. He thought of the woman from the stagecoach. She was another complication, another piece that did not fit, like the iron tracks, like the coal smoke, like the rumors of a map that promised life and threatened to destroy it. The land was patient, but the people on it were not. The drought was squeezing his people, and Elias Shaw was tightening his fist. The fire popped, sending a small shower of sparks into the dark. Daniel watched them die out, one by one. The promises made to his people felt like those sparks, bright for a moment, then gone, swallowed by the cold. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the talking was almost over. The time for hard choices was coming, carried on the back of the north wind. The morning brought no comfort, only a colder, thinner light. Eliza had slept poorly, the sounds of the town seeping through the thin walls of her room. She dressed in the gray light, her resolve feeling as brittle as the dry grass outside. As she laced her boots, a slip of paper slid under her door. She froze. It was a single, folded note, no envelope. She picked it up. Her fingers trembled slightly. Inside, the handwriting was sharp, hurried, and anonymous. Red Butte Postal Station. Noon. I have what you came for. The Black Ledger. Come alone. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The reason she had traveled 1,000 miles. The proof. The source who had been writing to St. Louis had finally surfaced. But the note felt wrong. It felt like a trap. Yet, how could she ignore it? This was the shovel her editor had spoken of. She packed her carpet bag, the heavy camera box a familiar weight. She secured her notebook. She checked the small pistol her editor had insisted she carry, a weapon she had never touched, and left it in the bag. She would not be the one carrying a gun. She would rent a horse. The postal station was 3 miles out of town, a lonely speck on the prairie, used as a relay point for the mail riders. She rented a quiet sorrel mare from the livery. Ignoring the curious look from the stable hand, she rode out of Red Butte, playing the part of a governess taking the air. The vastness of the land swallowed her. The wind was her only companion, whining in her ears, pulling at her bonnet. The trail narrowed, winding through a pass of broken rock and juniper. The silence was profound, broken only by the click of her mare's hooves on stone. A sound split the air. Sharp, flat, a rifle shot. It echoed, bouncing off the canyon walls. Eliza reined in her horse, her blood turning cold. The shot had come from just ahead. Around the bend, she dismounted, her hands shaking so much she fumbled with the reins. She tied the mare to a scrubby tree, her mind screaming at her to turn back, to ride to town. But the reporter in her, the part that craved the truth, pushed her forward. She crept along the rocky edge of the trail, her thin boots slipping on the loose gravel. She peered around a tall spire of red rock. Below her, in the dusty wash, was a mail wagon. One of its horses was down. The other was trying to break free from its harness. A man lay beside the wagon, his dark hair stark against the pale dust. He wore the jacket of a postal rider. As she watched, another man, tall and broad, stood over him. The standing man wore a heavy leather coat, and even from this distance, Eliza could see the distinct, ugly stitching on the shoulder seam. It looked like a fishhook, sewn over and over in thick sinew. The man kicked the rider, who did not move. He ripped the mailbags from the wagon, tearing them open, his movements frantic, angry. He seemed to be looking for something specific. He cursed, threw the bags down, and grabbed the reins of his own horse, a big roan tethered nearby. He did not look up. He mounted and spurred the horse back the way he had come, disappearing down a side canyon. Eliza waited until the sound of his hoofbeats faded. Then she scrambled down the embankment. The rider was still alive. Barely. He was a young man, Mexican, his face pale beneath the dust. His eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him. He looked at her, his gaze unfocused, seeing not her, but perhaps the woman he was meant to meet. "The ledger," he whispered, his breath catching. "He took... Who?" Eliza asked, her voice tight. "Who did this?" "Shaw," the man coughed, a thin trickle of red at his lips. He gripped her sleeve, his fingers surprisingly strong. "Willow, draw careful. Girl, the hounds are sniffing." His eyes went wide, fixed on the hard blue sky, and the strength left his hand. He was gone. Eliza knelt there, frozen. The silence of the pass rushed back in, heavier this time, freighted with death. The man's warning echoed in her head. "The hounds are sniffing!" She was the girl. He was supposed to meet her. The instinct took over. This was the crime. This was the story. She had to document it. She scrambled back up to her horse, grabbed the heavy camera box and the tripod. Her hands were clumsy. She set up the tripod, her back to the pass, her focus entirely on the scene of the attack. She ducked under the black cloth, the world reduced to an upside-down, silvered image on the glass plate. She adjusted the focus. The dead man, the rifled mailbags, the desolate canyon. She did not hear the horse. She did not hear the man approach. A shadow fell over her, blocking the light. That is a dangerous picture to take. Eliza screamed, stumbling out from under the cloth, ripping the fabric. She fell backward, landing hard in the dust. Daniel 2 Moon stood over her, his face impassive. He had not ridden up. He was just there, his hand resting lightly on the buckskin mare that stood behind him. "You," she breathed, clutching her chest. "You frightened me." "You are trespassing on a crime scene," he said, his voice quiet, calm. He looked past her, at the dead rider. His jaw tightened, the white scar standing out. "He was a mail rider. This is my route." Daniel had heard the shot. He had left his own escort half a mile back, moving on foot, reading the signs. He had already found the tracks of the killer's horse. The shoes were worn unevenly, the left front digging deep, and he had found something else, something that did not belong, a fine, gritty black dust, clinging to the rocks where the killer had waited. Coal dust, from the Shaw Company plant, 5 miles east. He looked at Eliza, her expensive camera, her terrified eyes, her Eastern clothes. "You are the governess." Yes, I was riding. I heard the shot." "And you stopped to take a photograph." His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He knew she was lying. He saw the way she looked at the mailbags. He saw the dead man's hand, still half clenched, as if he had been holding something. "They will kill you for that," he said, nodding at her camera. "I have to report this. The deputy in Red Butte will take your camera. Thank you, and give your name to the man who did this." Eliza's blood ran cold. "You do not know that?" "I know," Daniel said. "I know this town. I know who pulls the strings." He held out his hand. "Give me the plate." "What? No. This is my proof." "It is your death warrant," he said, his voice still low, patient, as if explaining to a child. I am the guide for this line. This dead man is my business. The men who did this are my business. You are a ghost. You were not here. Give me the plate. I will keep it safe. I know the places in these hills. Places where no one will ever find it. And what do I get? She asked, her voice shaking but defiant. You get to live. You get to ride into town with me. We will report this together. You are the woman who found him. I am the postal guide. You have no picture. You have no proof. You are safe. How do I know I can trust you? She said, scrambling to her feet, dusting off her skirt. You could work for Shaw, just like the deputy. Daniel looked at her. For the first time, a flicker of something moved in his eyes. Not anger, something colder. He touched the pale scar on his jaw. The United States Army gave me this. Elias Shaw's surveyors tried to give me another. I am Northern Cheyenne. Shaw is not my friend. Eliza looked at his outstretched hand. He was right. She knew he was right. To walk into the deputy's office with that plate was suicide. She felt a wave of despair. The proof was useless if she was dead. Slowly, carefully, she opened the camera, removed the heavy glass plate, and slid it into its dark cloth sleeve. She handed it to him. His calloused fingers closed around it. He slid it deep into his own saddlebag. Now, he said, we ride. The deputy sheriff's office smelled of stale tobacco and dust. Deputy Miller was a large man, his belly straining his waistcoat. He listened to Eliza's story with a profound lack of interest, his feet propped on his desk. A mail rider, you say shot, he sighed, running a hand over his face. Likely gamblers, miss or a dispute over a woman. These Mexicans, they live hot, they die hot. It is a shame, but it is not a mystery. I saw the man who did it, Eliza insisted, trying to keep her voice steady, playing the role of the frightened governess. He wore a leather coat. It had stitching, like a fish hook. Miller's eyes sharpened. Just for a second. He shot a look at Daniel, who stood silently by the door. Fish hooks, you say? That is specific. And the tracks, Daniel said, speaking for the first time. His voice filled the small room. They came from the east, from the direction of the Shaw coal plant. There was coal dust on the rocks. Miller swung his feet to the floor. His chair scraped. Now you listen to me? 2 moons. You are paid to guide the mail, not to stir up trouble. You starting to track on company land that is trespassing. Elias Shaw pays good money to this territory. He pays for this office. His community support fund keeps this town running. You understand me. I will send a man to collect the body. You two go about your business. And miss, he added, his eyes settling on Eliza, I suggest you stick to teaching children. The air out here can be unhealthy for those who ask too many questions. He dismissed them. Just like that. The report was not even written down. Eliza walked out into the street, her body rigid with fury. He did not even take our names. He already knows mine, Daniel said. And now he knows yours. He looked at the sun, already westering. You were going to the postal station, not just riding. It was not a question. Eliza stopped. Yes. You were meeting him. She nodded, the lie pointless now. He was bringing me something. A black ledger, proof of Shaw's crimes. Daniel looked at the small post office. Let's go. The station was empty. The postmaster out to lunch. Eliza walked behind the counter, her heart pounding. The letter had said the ledger would be in the dead drop, a loose floorboard behind the potbelly stove. She knelt, her fingers finding the edge of the board. She pulled it up. The space below was empty. He got it, she whispered, despair closing her throat. The killer, he knew what he was looking for. Maybe not, Daniel said. He was scanning the room, his eyes sharp. He knelt beside her, reaching into the dusty cavity. His fingers brushed against something. A single piece of paper, folded and damp, crammed into a crack in the wood. It felt sweaty, as if held in a hot hand for a long time. He pulled it out. It was a single page, torn from a ledger book. The ink was blurred, but the words were legible. It was a list of names, members of the Northern Cheyenne Council. Beside them were figures, amounts, and dates. At the bottom, a hurried scrawl. Willow number 7. Contracts forced. They cannot read what they sign. The map is the key. Eliza looked at Daniel. His face was granite. Willow number 7, Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. It is the sacred spring, the one that never runs dry. My grandfather's grandfather. He stopped. He folded the page, his knuckles white. They are not just buying land. They are stealing our water, using paper. Eliza thought of the dying rider. The hounds are sniffing. He died to get this to you, Daniel said. He looked at her, his gaze direct, heavy. This is more than a newspaper story for you now. I will not stop, Eliza said, her voice low, fierce. I will find the rest of that book. I will find the map. You cannot, Daniel said. You are one woman. They will crush you. Then what? She demanded, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. Let them win. Let them kill men and steal water and laugh at us in that office. Daniel was silent for a long time. The only sound, the ticking of the wall clock. You cannot do this alone, he said finally. You look like a teacher, but you have the eyes of a hunter, and you are a target. And you are more than just a guide, she countered. He nodded slowly. We want the same thing. We want Shaw stopped. His iron horse, his paper laws. We want him out of Willow Draw. He extended his hand, not the hand that had demanded the plate, his other hand. We work together, he said, for now. Eliza looked at his hand. It was calloused, strong, and stained with the dust of the land. She placed her own gloved hand into his. It felt like stepping off a cliff. All right, she said, together. He held her hand for a moment longer. But we have rules. Daniel said, I do not share the secrets of my people. Where we go, what we know, that is ours. I understand, Eliza said, pulling her hand back. And I do not share my sources, my methods, my story is my own. Agreed, Daniel said. The pact was sealed. A temporary, fragile alliance born of death and dust. He still had her photograph. She had the single, sweaty page. It was not much to fight a railroad, but it was a start. The news arrived on the back of a freight wagon, carried not by wire, but by paper. Thick posters, printed in bold black letters, were nailed to the telegraph poles and the flat, false front of the Mercantile. Elias Shaw was coming to Red Butte. He was not just passing through. He was arriving to celebrate. The posters announced the grand opening of the Cheyenne Ridge Spur Line, a new artery of iron and steam pushing deep toward the high valleys. To mark the occasion, the Shaw Rail and Cattle Corporation invited every man, woman, and child to a 3-day fair. There would be games, livestock prizes, cheap rail fares, and a grand ball at the newly constructed freight depot. It was a celebration of progress, a testament to the taming of the land for the good of the public. Eliza Hart stood in the dusty street, reading the words. She felt a cold sickness in her stomach. A grand ball. He was planning a party on stolen land, paid for with stolen water. The dead mail rider, the fear in his eyes, the sweaty, crumpled page from the ledger book. These things felt a world away from the bright promises on the poster. Shaw was not just a thief. He was a performer. He was inviting the very people he was robbing to applaud his generosity. She saw Daniel across the street, his back to her, reading the same poster. He stood for a long time, perfectly still. Then, without a word to anyone, he untied his mare, swung into the saddle, and rode out of town, heading not east toward the mail route, but west, toward the parched, high plains that led to Willow Draw. The ride took him 6 hours. The land grew quieter, the air thinner. The smell of coal smoke and fried bacon faded. replaced by the clean, sharp scent of sage and dry earth. He passed the boundary markers, simple wooden posts driven into the ground, marking the edge of the territory allotted to his people. The grass here was no better. The drought held the valley in a tight, brown fist. He found gray cedar not in his lodge, but sitting on a high ridge overlooking the dry bed of what had once been a strong creek. The elder was a man made of sinew and memory, his face a map of the seasons he had seen. He did not turn as Daniel approached and sat beside him. They watched the land together for many minutes, the silence a conversation in itself. Finally, Gray Cedar spoke, his voice like stones rubbing together. He said, "The wind tells me they are coming with paper and music." Daniel nodded. "A fair, a celebration for the new tracks." Gray Cedar pointed a long, thin finger at the dry creek bed. "The water is low, but the heart of the water," he said, turning his dark eyes to Daniel. "The heart is still strong." He was speaking of Willow Spring, the one they called Number 7, the sacred source, the spring that fed the hidden aquifers, the one the old stories said would never fail as long as the people kept faith with the land. "The white men," Gray Cedar continued, "they do not understand the heart. They only understand the throat. They are thirsty, and they will take it. They offer paper, and our young men, their bellies empty and their children crying, are ready to sign." Daniel's own jaw tightened. The ledger page, contracts forced. Gray Cedar placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. His grip was light, but held the weight of generations. "You were a soldier. You were a guide. You have walked in their world. You must tell them, Red Hawk, that if they take the heart of the water, the body of the people will die. We will be ghosts, scattered from this sacred meadow. There is no negotiating with thirst. There is only life or leaving." Daniel looked at the elder, at the quiet despair in his eyes. He knew his path. His purpose was not just to stop Shaw, it was to save this spring. While Daniel rode back to Red Butte, the setting sun at his back, Eliza felt the walls of her small hotel room closing in. She held the single ledger page, but it was not enough. It was a whisper. She needed a shout. She thought of Daniel, of the coal dust he had found on the rocks near the dead rider. An idea, sharp and dangerous, took root. The Shaw Corporation had a new coal yard near the tracks, but the townspeople spoke of the old one, a collection of sheds and a loading depot abandoned when the spur line was planned. It was on the edge of town, desolate, forgotten. She waited until dusk, the time when the town was noisy with men heading to the saloons and the hotel dining room. She slipped out, her camera bag left behind, carrying only her notebook and a small crowbar she had purchased at the Mercantile, claiming it was for a stubborn trunk. The old warehouse was a skeleton, its boards warped. The wind whistled through the gaps. The main door was padlocked, but a smaller office door, shielded from the street, was held only by a rotting frame. She put her shoulder to it, and the wood splintered, the lock giving way with a sad groan. The air inside was thick with dust, the smell of rat droppings and old, dry canvas. Faded manifests were scattered on the floor. In the corner, a potbelly stove stood cold, a rusted pipe angling toward the ceiling. It was a place of endings, of things left behind. She searched with a desperate, quiet energy. She pulled open desk drawers, finding only spider webs and petrified inkwells. She kicked at piles of rotting sacks, the canvas disintegrating under her boot. It was under the last pile, in a small hollow in the floorboards, that she found it, a tin box, the kind used for tobacco. It was not locked. Inside was not a ledger. It was a map. It was drawn in pencil, crude and hurried, on a piece of greasy paper. It showed the creeks of the high valley, the ridges, and the line of the new railroad, and in the center, near the peaks labeled Willow Draw, was a small, sharp mark, an X, with the number 7 written beside it. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. Willow number 7. And then she saw it, in the bottom corner, small, almost lost in a smudge of graphite, was a single letter, An italic H. H. The blood drained from her face. Hart? Her father. His name was Arthur Hart. He had been a hydrologist, a man obsessed with the secret life of water beneath the earth. He had come west 10 years ago, on a survey contract for a cattle baron. He had written letters to her, letters full of excitement about the vast, hidden rivers he was charting. And then the letters had stopped. He had vanished. The company had sent its regrets. A terrible accident, a fall from a ridge while taking measurements. His horse was found. He was not. His body, they said, was likely lost in one of the deep, unmapped canyons. Eliza stared at the H. Her entire life, she had believed him a victim, a good man lost to the wilderness. But this map, this secret, what if he was not a victim? What if he was a partner? The thought was a betrayal, sharp and cold. H. Or Harrigan. She remembered the name, whispered in the saloon. Harrigan, Elias Shaw's foreman, the man who ran the coal plant, the man who, rumor had it, oversaw Shaw's negotiations and employed the riders with the fishhook stitch on their coats. Was this map her father's discovery, stolen by Harrigan, or was it her father's sin? A secret he kept. The ambiguity was a new kind of pain, sharper than her fear. She folded the map, her hands trembling, and hid it in the bodice of her dress. She backed out of the warehouse, pulling the broken door as closed as it would go. The sun was gone, the sky a deep, bruised purple. The air was cold, and she felt watched. He was standing across the road, partially hidden by a large water tower. He was not trying to hide. Not really. He was just there, a solid block of shadow. He wore a long leather coat. He stepped forward, into the fading light. It was the man from the canyon. She could not see the fishhook stitch from this distance, but she knew. He did not move, did not reach for a weapon. He just stood there, his presence an iron wall between her and the safety of the hotel. Eliza's feet felt like lead, but she forced them to move. She did not run. She walked, her spine rigid, her chin high, acting the part of the governess who had taken a wrong turn. She expected him to call out, to move. He did nothing. He just watched. She reached the main street, the noise of the saloon spilling out. She was almost at the hotel, her hand reaching for the porch rail. A sound split the night, a flat, deafening crack. Splinters exploded from the porch post, stinging her cheek. The shot was so close. She felt the heat of its passage. She screamed, dropping to her knees, the rough boards biting into her palms. She was exposed. She scrambled toward the door. A hand grabbed her arm, pulling her hard, spinning her around the corner of the hotel, into the darkness of the alley. She fell against a solid body, smelling sage and dust and horse. "Daniel!" He held her against the wall, his body shielding hers. His voice was a low growl in her ear. "Stay down. Do not make a sound." He peered around the edge of the building. The street was in chaos. Men pouring from the saloon, shouting. The shooter was gone. Daniel relaxed his grip but did not move away. She was shaking, her whole body trembling with a violence she could not control. He looked down at her, his face unreadable in the dark. "They are done watching," he said. "Now they are warning." He had returned to town just in time to see her leaving the warehouse, and to see the man by the water tower. He had been circling, waiting, when the shot was fired. He stepped back, walked to the porch post, and with the tip of his knife, dug the flattened bullet from the wood. He looked at it in his palm. It was a heavy caliber, meant for a buffalo or a man. He looked at her, his eyes catching the light from the hotel lamp. "What did you find in that warehouse?" Back in her room, the flimsy lock bolted. Eliza showed him the map. She told him about the H, about her father. Daniel traced the X7 with his finger. His face was grim. "This is the heart," he said. They stood in the small room, the wind rattling the window. Their separate goals had merged into one sharp point. Eliza said, "I need the truth. I need to find the rest of that ledger and this map. I will publish it. I will show the world what Elias Shaw is." Daniel shook his head. His voice was low. "Certain. I do not care about your story. I care about the water. We need to save the land. Your truth is a weapon, but the land is what we are fighting for." They both knew Shaw was now the target, and the fair was the place, surrounded by the public, by music and laughter. He would be at his most open and his most protected. "We have to get close to him," Eliza said, her voice stronger now. "I will go. I am a governess. I will find a family in town, offer to help with their children, just to attend the ball." Daniel nodded. A good plan. He would be there too. He said, "Men like Shaw always need horses. They need men to guard their wagons. They do not trust their own shadows. They will hire protection, even a Cheyenne, if he looks like he can handle a gun." The alliance was fragile, but it was all they had. Later, long after Daniel had slipped away, Eliza sat on her bed, the map in her lap. The fear had subsided, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. She was not just a reporter seeking a story. She was a daughter seeking an answer. A scraping sound at her door made her jump. She stared at the thin wood, her heart leaping into her throat. She held her breath. It came again. A scrape, then a sharp tap. She waited. The silence stretched. Finally, she moved to the door. She listened. Nothing. Slowly, she eased the bolt back and opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, not under the door, was a flat piece of wood, a shingle. She picked it up, scratched into the wood with a piece of charcoal, the letters rough and angry. 7 days, the train runs. Get out of Willow. 7 days. The clock was no longer ticking. It was pounding. The fair, the ball, and the running of the train. It was all happening. The fuse had been lit. The Cheyenne Ridge Rail Fair exploded onto the prairie like a gaudy, painted blossom. After weeks of dust, wind, and quiet tension, the sudden noise was a shock. Men shouted from stalls, hawking everything from patent medicine to improved barbed wire. The air, usually clean and sharp with sage, was now thick and heavy, a muddle of livestock manure, fresh sawdust, roasting meat, hot cinnamon, and the metallic, greasy breath of the new locomotive, which sat gleaming on its fresh-laid track like a black iron idol. Elias Shaw himself stood on a bunting-draped platform, his arms spread wide, a benevolent king greeting his subjects. He spoke of progress, of a shared future, of the great steel artery that would bring prosperity to them all. The crowd, hungry for good news and free food, cheered him. Daniel Two Moons stood near the edge of the platform, his arms crossed. He wore his usual clothes, but had a brass badge pinned to his shirt, identifying him as temporary security. It was a job he had taken with a grim satisfaction. The pay was good, and it put him inside the beast's own camp. He watched Shaw, watched the crowd, but mostly he watched Harrigan, the foreman, who moved through the fair with the restless, heavy-shouldered gait of a bull. Eliza Hart was there, too. She had, with a believable performance of nervous gentility, offered her services to the wife of the town's banker, a woman overwhelmed by her 3 boisterous sons. Eliza, the calm, educated governess, was a godsend, and her presence at the fair, minding the children, was perfectly natural. It gave her a reason to be everywhere, to listen, to watch. She kept the children occupied with hoop rolling and candy, her mind racing, her eyes cataloging every interaction. She saw Deputy Miller, sweating in his good suit, laughing too loudly at one of Shaw's jokes. She saw the ranchers, their faces hard, accepting Shaw's hospitality while their eyes betrayed their anxiety. And then she saw an opportunity. Shaw was posing for a photograph with the banker's family. The photographer, a fussy man from Cheyenne, was struggling with his large, tripod-mounted equipment. Eliza, seeing her chance to document the scene, to capture the false smiles and the web of connections, unfastened her own, smaller carpet bag. She pulled out her little box camera. She was not a governess now. She was a reporter. She stepped back, lifting the camera, trying to frame Shaw, the banker, and the new depot sign in one shot. She did not see Harrigan turn. She did not see his eyes, which had been scanning the crowd, land on her. She did not see the flash of recognition, the sudden, ugly tightening of his mouth as he placed her. The woman from the abandoned warehouse? But Daniel saw. He saw Harrigan's focus lock. He saw the foreman start to move, his hand dropping to his belt, shoving aside smaller men in his path. Daniel moved faster. He crossed the 20 feet between them in 4 silent, fluid strides. He did not call her name. He simply grabbed her arm, hard, spinning her around. "What?" she gasped, the camera nearly falling. He did not explain. He hauled her backward, pulling her out of the main thoroughfare and deep into the sudden, warm shadow of a baker's tent. She stumbled against his chest, the world reduced to the overwhelming, sweet-hot smell of baked apples, cinnamon, and strong, dark coffee. She looked up, frightened and angry, and saw Harrigan burst through the canvas opening, his face a mask of suspicion. Daniel did not miss a beat. His arm, which had been grabbing hers, slid around her waist, pulling her tight against his side. The move was possessive, startling, and utterly convincing. He laughed, a broad, easy sound that was the purest acting. "Easy there, Mr. Harrigan," Daniel said, his voice full of mock cheer. "Can't a man greet his sweetheart without an interruption?" He looked down at Eliza, his dark eyes boring into hers. A silent, desperate command, "Be my sweetheart for a week." The words came out in a low, teasing rush, loud enough only for the 3 of them. "That's all I ask." He finished it with a wink, a perfect, rakish performance of a smitten cowboy who had just cornered his girl. Eliza's heart was hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. She understood. This was a cover. This was protection. She had to play her part. Her fear-frozen body thawed. She leaned into his hold, her own arm looping through his, her hand finding his. "Only a week," she managed to say, her voice trembling just enough to sound like breathless affection. She rested her head against his shoulder for a beat, a gesture of shy possession. Their hands clasped. His was calloused, dry, and incredibly warm. Hers, still in its neat governess glove, gripped his with a strength that betrayed her terror. And in that grip, something else passed between them. A current, sharp and unexpected. It was not just an act. In the hot, spice-filled darkness, it felt real. Harrigan stared, his eyes moving from Daniel's easy smile to Eliza's flushed face. He was not convinced. Not entirely, but he was stymied. To accuse them now, to grab the governess from the arms of her sweetheart, would cause a scene. And Elias Shaw did not like scenes that he did not orchestrate. "You watch yourself. 2 moons, Harrigan growled, his threat diffuse, impotent. He backed out of the tent, his eyes promising a reckoning, and was swallowed by the bright noise of the fair. They stayed frozen for a second. Then, slowly, the tension broke. Eliza pulled her hand from his, her body straightening. The smell of cinnamon and coffee seemed to cling to them, a marker of their shared lie. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still shaky. "He recognized me from the warehouse." "I know," Daniel said, his voice low, his easy smile gone. "Now you have a part to play. Stay close to me, as close as you can." They walked back into the sunlight, their arms linked. They were a performance now, for Harrigan's benefit, for anyone who might be watching. They moved through the crowded stalls, 2 people lost in the glow of a new romance. They passed a dilapidated tent where an Absolute man sat on a crate, a whiskey bottle at his feet. His eyes were unfocused, his hair unkempt. He was selling trinkets and secrets to the gullible. He held up a piece of stiff, smoked hide, a map crudely drawn in charcoal. "Map," he slurred, waving it. "Map to the hidden water, the white man's gold. Buy the map." Eliza tugged Daniel's arm, but Daniel stopped. He looked at the man, then at the map. He traded a few coins for the piece of hide. They walked away, Eliza's curiosity burning. "Is it real?" she asked, once they were clear. "Could it be that easy?" Daniel shook his head, his fingers tracing the charcoal lines. "No, the symbols are wrong. This sign," he pointed. "He's drawn the symbol for mountain upside down. It means trap. And the circle for the sacred spring, it's broken, incomplete. This is a plant, a lie. Shaw's men put him up to this. They want someone, us maybe, to find this and follow it, straight into an ambush." He folded the map and tucked it away. "But even a lie can tell you something. It tells you they are worried about the real map." That night, the celebration moved to the new freight depot. The cavernous wooden building, still smelling of raw pine, had been transformed. Hundreds of lanterns hung from the rafters, and a string quartet sawed away at a waltz. Elias Shaw moved through the crowd, his arm around his wife, while his personal lawyer, Lydia Morrow, stood near him. She was a woman in dark silk, her hair perfectly coiled, her eyes missing nothing. Eliza stood near the punch bowl, having delivered her young charges back to their mother. She was now just a quiet governess, invisible, observing. She watched Deputy Miller, his face slick with sweat, edge his way through the crowd to Lydia Morrow. He spoke in a low, agitated whisper. "The community fund isn't going to be enough," Eliza heard him complain, his voice tight with fear. "My neck is way out. That Indian, 2 moons. He's sniffing around. And the new girl—" Lydia Morrow cut him off, her voice like ice. "You will be paid in full, Deputy, when the last signature from the Willow Draw Council is on that water right transfer deed. Not one moment before. Your job is to ensure there are no interruptions at the signing ceremony. Or I assure you, your name might find its way into a different kind of ledger. Do we understand each other?" "Miller!" His face pale, nodded quickly and backed away, melting into the crowd. Daniel was outside. His job was to stand by the main doors, a visible symbol of Shaw's security. He was a statue, his face calm, watching the laughing, dancing settlers. Harrigan, his face flushed with whiskey, found him there. "Enjoying the party, bodyguard," the foreman sneered, stepping close, his voice a low growl. "Playing dress-up with that little schoolmarm, you think I'm stupid." Daniel's expression did not change. He looked through Harrigan, not at him. "Just doing my job. Mr. Harrigan, making sure the company's property stays safe." "A tame Indian," Harrigan spat, wanting a reaction, needing to assert his power. He shoved Daniel, a hard, heavy push to the shoulder. Daniel did not move, his boots planted, absorbing the force without a flicker. "It is a public place, Mr. Harrigan," he said, his voice perfectly level. "Quiet. Mr. Shaw would not like a scene." Frustrated, knowing he was beaten without a punch being thrown, Harrigan cursed and stormed off into the darkness. Much later, the party was thinning. Eliza slipped out the back door, needing air, her head spinning from the music and the lies. She found Daniel on the dark, unfinished loading dock, looking out not at the town, but at the black, empty plains beyond. The cold wind was a relief. "He tried to provoke you," she said, standing beside him. Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "A rabid dog barks," he said. "You do not bark back. You just wait for it to show its throat." They stood in the comfortable silence, the distant music a faint buzz. The land before them was immense, a dark ocean. He pointed into the blackness. "The wind," he said, his voice soft. "It is coming from the north. It means the real cold is settling in for the night. It smells of pine and snow that has not fallen yet. That means it crossed the high ridges, far to the west. He was teaching her, not just about the wind, but about how to listen, how to know the world by its feel, by its breath. Emboldened by the darkness, by his unexpected gentleness, she found herself telling him about her father. His name was Arthur Hart. He was a hydrologist, a waterman. He came out here 10 years ago. On a contract, he disappeared. They said it was an accident, a fall. She reached into the small reticule at her wrist and pulled out the small, worn tin type, the edges soft. This was the last picture he sent me. He wrote on the back that he was standing by a creek he called Willow. He said it was the most beautiful place he had ever seen. Daniel took the small metal plate. He angled it to catch the faint lantern light from the depot. He looked at the squinting, happy man, and his eyes sharpened. He looked at the background, at the distinct formation of 3 rocks behind Arthur Hart's shoulder. He knew that place. He knew it well. As he was about to hand it back, a small shadow detached itself from the side of the depot. A young boy, no more than 10, who sold the Cheyenne leader in the saloons, ran up to them. He'd seen Eliza in town, seen her reading the papers with an intensity that few others did. Miss Hart," he whispered, looking around nervously. He pressed a small, crumpled scrap of paper into her hand. "I found this in the trash by the telegraph office. Figured you might want it." Before she could thank him, he vanished back into the night. Eliza unfolded the paper. It was a torn piece of telegraph, flimsy. A message that had been discarded. The pencil was faint, but the words were clear. "Map is a lie. Real one at the old chapel. Cross Hill. Be careful." Eliza looked at Daniel, her heart leaping. "The old chapel?" she breathed. "The old mission," Daniel said, his voice tight. "On the ridge overlooking the pass. It has been empty for years. They say it is haunted." They looked at each other. The week of their act, the pretense of the fair, it all fell away. This was the first real clue. The lie they had told Harrigan was suddenly the deepest truth they had. "My name is Daniel," he said, as if introducing himself for the first time. Not just guide or 2 moons. "Eliza," she replied, her own name a vow. He reached into the small, beaded pouch at his belt. He pulled out a small, intricately carved piece of dark wood. He pressed it into her palm. It was the shape of a perfect, tiny eagle's nest, hollowed and smooth. "My grandfather made this," he said, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear him. "In our way, the eagle is a messenger. He flies highest. He is never lost." He gently closed her fingers around the small, warm carving. "So the wind knows how to bring you home." Eliza clutched the charm. Its smooth wood a sudden anchor in her reeling world. It felt like a promise. The 7-day countdown, the desperate lie about being sweethearts, had just become the most honest and most dangerous thing in her life. They moved under the cover of a moonless, star-choked sky. The wind had died, and the silence of the high plains was absolute. The fair, with its noise and light, felt 100 miles away, though it was only 2. Daniel led the way, his mare moving with a silence that seemed impossible for a shod horse. Eliza followed, her own rented mount sensing her nervousness and skittering at every shadow. Cross Hill was a low, dark mound against the horizon, crowned by the jagged silhouette of the abandoned mission. It was a place the townsfolk avoided, a place of failed prayers and lonely graves. Daniel dismounted at the base of the hill, tying their horses in a deep cleft of rock, hidden from any passing rider. "We walk from here," he whispered, "and no light." The climb was steep, the path overgrown with thorny brush that plucked at Eliza's skirts. Daniel moved like a shadow, seeming to find footing on the loose, crumbling scree by instinct. Eliza, clutching the small wooden eagle's nest in her pocket, focused on the sound of his steady breathing ahead of her. The chapel was smaller than she expected, its adobe walls sagging, The roof mostly gone, exposing the dark rafters to the stars. The heavy wooden door was half off its leather hinges, leaning inward. Daniel put a hand on the weathered wood. Listening, he heard nothing but the scurry of a small night creature. He pushed the door, which groaned in protest, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet. The air inside was cold, colder than the air outside. It was thick with the smell of dry rot, packed rat nests, and the faint, unmistakable, cloying sweetness of old. Cold candle wax. Moonlight streamed through the collapsed roof, illuminating a floor thick with dust and debris. At the far end, a simple wooden altar remained, and beside it, a carved wooden statue of a saint. Its paint flaked, one hand missing. "Look," Eliza whispered, her voice absorbed by the heavy silence. "The telegraph, it said Cross Hill." She pointed to the altar. A large, simple wooden cross had fallen onto its side, half buried in rubble. Daniel moved past it, his eyes scanning the floor. He was looking for tracks, for any sign of the person who had left the note. The dust was thick, but undisturbed, save for their own footprints. "He was not here recently," Daniel said. "This was left a long time ago." "Then the note," Eliza began, "was a message," Daniel finished. "From someone who knew this was here, someone who wanted it found." He approached the statue of the saint. It was about 4 feet high, set on a low pedestal. He ran his hand over the carved robes, the painted, serene face. His fingers explored the base. He felt a seam, a small crack in the wood that was not part of the grain. He pressed it. A section of the saint's robes, low on the side, clicked and opened inward. A small, hidden door. Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel reached into the dark, hollow cavity. His fingers brushed against something stiff and round. He pulled it out. It was a leather tube, the kind used for carrying maps, stiff with age, the flap held down by a dried leather tie. They moved back into the center of the chapel, into the patch of pale moonlight. Eliza's fingers, clumsy with anticipation, fumbled with the knot. Daniel took it from her, his own fingers working the brittle leather with practiced ease. The tie came loose. He upended the tube, and 2 items slid into his palm. The first was a map, drawn not in pencil, but in proper ink, on treated linen. It was a professional document. Eliza unfolded it. There it was, the S-shaped canyon, the ridges, the tributaries, and, marked with a precise geological symbol, Willow Spring No. 7. This was the original. This was the hydrologist's map. But it was the second item that stopped Eliza's heart. It was a photograph, faded and stiff, a tintype. It showed a man in a felt hat and shirt sleeves, squinting in the bright sun, one hand resting proudly on a wooden survey marker. The background was unmistakable. The 3 tall rocks, the same rocks from the tintype she carried of her father. It was her father. "He was here," she breathed, tears stinging her eyes. "He made this map. He knew." "Eliza," Daniel said, his voice quiet, urgent. He took the photograph from her, his gaze locked on the bottom corner. She had not seen it. In the shadow cast by her father, almost out of the frame, was the small, blurred shape of someone else. A child, a native child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, looking not at the camera, but at her father. And around the child's neck, catching the sun, was a small, carved wooden charm. An eagle's nest. Eliza looked from the photograph to the charm Daniel had given her, the one she now held clutched in her hand. "It is the same." Daniel stared at the image. He did not speak. His face was a mask of disbelief. He knew that charm. He knew the child. The shadow in the photograph was his own. He had been that boy. He remembered the waterman, the kind white man with the strange, ticking instruments who had given him a piece of hard candy and talked to the water as if it were a person. The man who had disappeared a week later. "That," he said, his voice thick. "Was my uncle's charm. He gave it to me." He looked at Eliza. The chasm between their two worlds suddenly bridged by this impossible, shared past. "Your father, I knew him." A sound from outside shattered the moment. The sharp, metallic click of a rifle hammer being cocked. "Down!" Daniel shouted. He threw himself at Eliza, tackling her to the floor, pulling her behind the heavy, overturned altar just as the night exploded. A shot ripped through the door, the bullet thudding into the wooden altar, sending splinters flying. Another shot and another, stitched across the weak adobe wall, the slugs punching through the dry mud like fists. "They were waiting," Daniel hissed, pulling his own revolver. The note was a trap. "No!" Eliza panted, her mind racing. "The map was here. They did not know where. They were waiting for us to find it for them." She was right. Harrigan's men, the man from the pass, the fish-hook coats. Daniel peered over the edge of the altar. He saw two men, silhouettes against the starlight, moving from the chapel door toward the graveyard. They were trying to flank them, to get a clear shot. "We have to move," he said. He grabbed her hand. "Keep your head down. When I move, you move." He fired 2 shots toward the door, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The return fire was instant. Concentrated on his muzzle flash. "Now!" he yelled, pulling Eliza toward a gaping hole in the back wall, where the sacristy had once been. They burst through it, stumbling into the open air, into the cemetery. It was a field of leaning wooden crosses and crumbling stone markers. It offered a dozen places to hide and a dozen places to be cornered. A man shouted from their right, "There by the angel!" A bullet whined past Eliza's ear. She cried out, dropping to the ground. Daniel grabbed her, pulling her behind a large granite headstone. "They're trying to pin us," Daniel said, his mind racing. He was a guide, not a soldier, but he had been both. He saw the layout of the land, the flow of the fight. "I have to draw them off. Stay here. Do not move, no matter what you hear." "No," she whispered, clutching his arm. "Daniel, do not leave me." "I am not leaving you," he said, his voice fierce. He pressed the map and the photograph into her hand. "Put these inside your dress. Keep them safe. I will be back." Before she could argue, he was gone, a shadow moving between shadows. Eliza pressed herself against the cold stone, her heart choking her. She heard shouting, a shot far to her left, then another to her right. He was moving, drawing their fire, confusing them. She heard a man curse. "He's fast, he's heading for the ridge." She heard the sound of running boots on gravel. Then, a different sound. The sound of a man's body hitting the earth, hard, followed by a sharp cry of pain. Daniel had not fired his gun. He had moved in a wide circle, coming up behind one of the gunmen. He had thrown a handful of loose stones at the man's horse, which was tethered to a nearby iron fence. The horse reared in terror, pulling the fence post loose and crashing into the gunman, sending him tumbling. One shot fired harmlessly into the sky. The man lay groaning, his leg broken. One left. The last gunman, seeing his partner fall, panicked. He ran for his own horse, firing wildly back toward the chapel. Daniel let him go. He watched the man mount and spur his horse frantically down the hill, disappearing into the darkness. Daniel did not kill. He protected. He survived. He walked back to the headstone. Eliza was still there, rigid with fear. When she saw his shape, she let out a sob of relief and threw herself into his arms, clutching the front of his shirt. "It is all right," he said, his voice rough. He held her for a second, feeling the violent tremor of her body. "They are gone. One is hurt, the other fled. We are safe." He gently unwrapped her arms. "We have to go. They will be back." He helped her to her feet. She was shaking, unsteady. "I'm all right. I just—" She took a step and cried out, her hand flying to her arm. "Oh!" He looked. In the faint starlight, he saw the dark stain spreading on her sleeve. just below the shoulder. "You are hit." "No," she said, her voice faint. "It cannot be. It does not hurt." He pulled her into the shadow of the chapel wall. "Let me see." He did not wait for permission. He ripped the sleeve of her dress, the sound of tearing fabric loud in the night. It was a graze. The bullet had torn a hot, shallow furrow across her skin. It was bleeding freely, but it was not deep. She was lucky. "It is not bad," he said, his voice softening. He unslung his saddlebag, which he had never taken off. From it, he pulled a clean linen bandage and a small tin of salve. He was always prepared. "This will sting," he said. He cleaned the wound, his touch surprisingly gentle, his large, calloused hands steady. Eliza hissed, her breath catching in her throat, her other hand gripping his shoulder to steady herself. They were close. So close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the sage and dust on his skin, see the concentration in his eyes. Her heart was hammering, but it was no longer just from fear. His hands were shaking, just slightly, as he tied the bandage, his knuckles brushing her skin. It was an intimacy more profound than any she had ever known, a silent, shared acknowledgement of her fragility and his care. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice unsteady. He finished the knot and slowly stood up, putting a careful distance between them. "We cannot go back to town. They will be watching." He led her to the horses, and they rode not toward Red Butte, but deeper into the hills, into the dark, protective folds of the land he knew as well as his own hand. They found shelter in a high, narrow cleft of rock, a place invisible from the valley below. He spread his thick wool blanket on the cold stone and sat her down, then built a tiny, smokeless fire of dried juniper in a deep crevice. It gave off more warmth than light. He sat beside her, sharing the blanket, their shoulders touching. The cold of the night pressed in, but the small fire and their shared body heat created a fragile pocket of warmth. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the night, the map, the photograph, settling on them. "I am afraid," Eliza said, her voice small, all her reporter's fire banked by the cold and the shock. "I thought if I just found the truth, if I printed it, it would be enough. But that man, he would have killed us. For a piece of paper. My truth does not stop bullets." Daniel looked into the tiny flames. "I am afraid, too," he said, his confession a surprise even to himself. "I am afraid of paper. I am afraid of their laws. A bullet kills one man, a law, a bad treaty. A lying contract, it can kill a whole people. It can take our water, our land, our voice. It can make us disappear. I'm afraid that my people will be silenced, blown away like dust." He looked at her, his eyes serious in the firelight. "That map is more than truth. Eliza, it is a voice. It is the voice of the water. We have to make them listen." He took the map from his pocket. He had retrieved it from her before they mounted. He studied the edges. "Here," he said, pointing. "These are not just decorations. These are Cheyenne symbols. My grandfather taught me to read them." He traced the small, repeated triangles and lines. "They tell a story, where the snake drinks from the sky. The mountain that looks like a sitting man. It is a path, a way to find the spring. Starting from here." He pointed to a small, S-shaped drawing. "This is the canyon called the Snake's Mouth. It is the beginning. This map is not just where the spring is. It is how to get there." As the first faint hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, a rider was galloping into Red Butte. He did not go to the deputy's office. He went to the hotel, to the suite of rooms taken by Elias Shaw. The news spread through the town like poison in a well. By the time the sun was up, the saloon was packed. The story, twisted and amplified, was on everyone's lips. The northern Cheyenne had been hoarding water, hiding the springs. That guide, 2 Moons, had kidnapped the new governess to keep her quiet. They had been seen at the old chapel, practicing dark rituals. A small, angry crowd gathered outside the mercantile, demanding action. They demanded the army be called. They demanded the valley be sealed. Elias Shaw, in a brilliant move of public relations, issued a statement from the hotel balcony. He held up a hand for quiet. He spoke of his deep respect for his native brothers. He spoke of his concern for the missing Miss Hart. He announced that, in this time of trouble, his company would double its donation of flour and beef to the families at Willow Draw. It was a gesture of profound goodwill, and it cemented his position as the town's savior. The pressure on the Northern Cheyenne was now immense. In the deputy's office, Miller was facing his own failure, but there was one man on his staff who had watched the events with a growing sickness in his stomach. Deputy Finch. He was young, with a new wife and a baby at home. He had taken the job to uphold the law, not to serve Elias Shaw. He had seen Daniel 2 Moons in town. He knew him as an honest man. He had seen the fear in the eyes of the ranchers Shaw had bought out. He waited until Miller left for the saloon. Then he walked to the records room, where he knew the signed and unsigned contracts were kept. Along with the corporate filings, he unlocked the door, then took the key from his ring. He found Daniel an hour later, buying supplies at a small, remote trading post run by a half-breed he trusted. 2 Moons, Finch said, his voice low, his eyes darting around. He pressed the heavy iron key into Daniel's hand. This is to the records room at the courthouse. The real ledgers are in there. The land grants, the water contracts. Daniel looked at the key, then at the young, terrified deputy. Why? Because my family lives here, Finch said, his hands shaking. I do not want my son growing up in a town owned by men like Harrigan. I just want this to be over. You have to promise me if this goes bad. You protect my family. You get them out. You have my word, Daniel said. Finch nodded, then walked away. Just another man in a dusty street. Daniel pocketed the key. He had a map to the water. Eliza had a key to the paper lies, and they had 4 days. 4 days until the train ran, and the contracts, no matter how they were signed, became legal and binding. The clock was ticking, louder than ever. The records room was in the courthouse basement. It was not a room, but a cage. A section of the stone floor partitioned off with heavy iron bars. The single door was secured by a thick, new padlock. Finch's key, heavy and cold in Daniel's hand, was for the other lock, the old, official one. Miller, in his lazy arrogance, had simply added the new one, but had not bothered to change the door's hinges. They went in hours after midnight, when the town was deep in a drunken sleep, exhausted from the fair's second day. Daniel carried the crowbar Eliza had bought. He did not waste time on the locks. He wedged the bar into the gap by the top hinge, wrapped a cloth around the handle to muffle the sound, and put his weight into it. The iron screws groaned, a high tearing sound that seemed to fill the night. They both froze, listening. Nothing, only the wind. He put his back into it. The wood splintered. The old iron ripped free. The door sagged open. The air that hit them was dead and cold, thick with the smell of mildew and paper decay. Eliza lit a small, shielded lantern, the light barely cutting the gloom. The room was lined with shelves, stacked floor to ceiling with gray, ribbon-tied bundles of paper, deed books, and heavy ledgers. What are we looking for? Daniel whispered, standing guard at the ruined door. Contracts, Eliza said, her voice hushed, her eyes scanning the labels. Water rights, land transfers, anything signed by the Willow Draw Council, and, she swallowed, anything with my father's name. She set up her camera, the tripod's legs clicking softly on the stone floor. This was the only way. They could not steal the books, but they could steal their images. She found them in a large, black ledger marked Shaw Rail Territorial Acquisitions. 1883. She opened it. There they were, page after page of legal text, and at the bottom, the marks of the Northern Cheyenne Council members. Not signatures, but X's. And next to each X, a witness signature, Elias Shaw. And below that, Lydia Morrow, Legal counsel. She found the payment ledgers, the community support fund, the regular, large payments to Deputy Miller. "I have it," she whispered, her hands shaking as she poured the flash powder into the tray. She focused the lens. "Hold the lantern steady." She uncapped the lens, and the powder ignited with a brilliant, blinding foom, a flash of white light and thick, acrid smoke that momentarily lit the entire basement. The image was captured. "Again," she said, her voice tight, already preparing the next plate. She photographed the ledgers, the contracts, the payments. Each flash felt like a gunshot in the silent building. "Eliza," Daniel's voice was sharp. She looked up from the camera, her eyes still spotted with the flash. A woman stood in the doorway. She held no gun. She held only a lit candle, the small flame illuminating her pale, composed face. It was Lydia Morrow. She did not look surprised. She looked weary. She looked at the ruined door, the open ledgers, the camera. "Miss Hart," Lydia said, her voice as smooth and cold as river stone. "You are far more interesting than a simple governess." Eliza stood, her hand moving to the small pistol in her pocket, then stopping. She would not. "They are forced contracts," Eliza said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Signed under duress, and you witness them. You know they are fraudulent." Lydia Morrow took a step into the room, the candlelight flickering on her dark silk dress. "Fraud is a word. Duress is a feeling. What I see are legal documents, binding and filed. What you are doing is theft." "It is justice," Eliza countered. Lydia almost smiled. It was a terrible, sad expression. "Justice. You think justice is a story in a St. Louis newspaper. You think your little box of pictures will stop a railroad. Men like Shaw do not lose. Miss Hart, they own the land, they own the law, and they own the men who enforce it. You are not finding justice. You are committing suicide." Eliza faltered. "What is your price?" Lydia asked, her voice dropping. "Confidential. Is it money, your father's name cleared? Everyone has a price. Tell me yours, and I will see if Mr. Shaw can pay it." "I want the truth," Eliza said, her throat tight. "Truth," Lydia scoffed, "is just a story that enough people agree on. Mr. Shaw's story is stronger than yours." A heavy, running footstep echoed from the stairs above. "In here I heard them. Harrigan." Lydia Morrow's face changed. The weariness vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian calculation. She looked from Eliza to Daniel. She made her choice. Harrigan burst into the basement, Deputy Miller puffing behind him, both men holding drawn revolvers. They stopped short, seeing not just the intruders, but Lydia Morrow, standing calmly among them. They broke in. "Mr. Harrigan," Lydia said, her voice crisp. "They have damaged county property and are attempting to steal Mr. Shaw's private ledgers." Then another figure appeared on the stairs. Young Deputy Finch, his face white, his own gun in his hand. He had heard the break-in and come running, only to find his worst fears realized. Harrigan's eyes lit up, seeing it all, the intruders, the company lawyer, the traitor. He grinned, leveling his gun at Finch. Well, looks like we found the rat." "He has nothing to do with this," Eliza said quickly. "Shut up," Harrigan snapped. "She is right," Daniel said, stepping forward, his hands raised, moving between Harrigan and Finch. "He just arrived. We broke in. I forced her to come with me." He nodded at Eliza. "Let them go. I am the one you want." Harrigan looked at Daniel, his grin widening. This was better. This was perfect. "You," he said, his voice full of satisfaction. "The Red Hawk. Cuff him. Miller." Miller, relieved to have a target, lunged forward, snapping the heavy iron cuffs onto Daniel's wrists. "What about them?" Miller asked, gesturing to Eliza and Finch. "He's a coward," Harrigan said, jabbing a thumb at Finch. "He's fired," Give me your badge." Finch, shaking, unpinned his badge and handed it over. "Get out of here. Go home to your wife. You are lucky I do not put you in a cell." Finch looked at Daniel, his eyes full of shame, then scrambled up the stairs and disappeared. Harrigan turned to Eliza. "And you, the governess. You are done here. Get your things. The morning stage leaves at 6. If I see you in this town after that, I will arrest you for vagrancy. Do you understand me?" He grabbed her camera. "And this is evidence." He smashed it on the stone floor. The wooden box splintered, the glass plates shattering. Eliza cried out, a sound of pure loss, all of it, gone. "Now go," Harrigan said. "No," Daniel said. "Let her watch. Let her see what happens to people who stick their nose in company business." He looked at Eliza, his eyes hard, desperate. It was a command. "Watch, remember." Harrigan laughed. "I like that. Yes, watch. We are going to take your sweetheart for a walk." They hauled Daniel up the stairs and out into the cold night. A few late-night drinkers, drawn by the noise, followed. Harrigan paraded Daniel down the main street, pushing him toward the bridge at the edge of town, the one that crossed the deep, fast-moving river. Eliza followed, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She was numb. She had lost. The camera was gone. The proof was gone. And Daniel. They stopped in the middle of the long wooden bridge. The river roared below them, icy and black, fed by the high country melt. Harrigan pushed Daniel against the railing. "This is where your story ends. Indian. You and your little girlfriend thought you were so smart." He leaned in, his voice a low, vicious taunt meant only for Daniel. But Eliza was close enough to hear. "You know who you remind me of, her old man. Hart, the waterman." Eliza froze. "Oh yes," Harrigan sneered, seeing her reaction. He was smart, too, worked for Shaw, found the spring, mapped it all out. Then he got a conscience, wanted to tell the world, just like you, wanted to make it public. He leaned in, his face inches from Daniel's. "Mister, Shaw cannot have partners with a conscience. So, we had a little talk. Right here, he had an accident. Fell. It is a long way down, and the river is very cold." "You," Eliza choked, stumbling forward. "You murdered him." "He slipped," Harrigan said, his eyes dead. He turned back to Daniel. "And now, so will you." It happened faster than she could see. Daniel had been waiting, coiled. As Harrigan drew back his fist to strike, Daniel lunged forward, not fighting, but moving. He used Harrigan's own body as a lever, twisted, and in one fluid motion, he vaulted over the wooden railing. He fell into the blackness. "No!" Eliza screamed. Harrigan, stunned, ran to the rail, firing his revolver into the dark water. Bang, bang, bang! The shots were useless, swallowed by the roar of the river. Daniel was gone. The crowd was silent. Harrigan was breathing hard, his face pale in the moonlight. He had been cheated of his kill. "He is dead," Harrigan said, forcing a laugh. "No one survives that. The current will take him to well. It does not matter. He is dead." He turned to Eliza, his face a mask of cold fury. 6 a.m. Be on that stage." Eliza did not move. She stared at the black, churning water. She felt nothing. The cold had entered her, frozen her solid. Her father, murdered. Daniel, dead. The proof, shattered on a basement floor. It was over. She turned, a mechanical doll, and walked back to the hotel. She did not cry. She could not. She packed her bag, the one she had arrived with. She laid out her traveling dress. She clutched the small, wooden eagle's nest in her hand, the last thing she had of him. It was just a piece of wood now. The next day, the entire town was shaken by a new announcement, posted by Elias Shaw himself. Due to the unfortunate events and the unrest caused by outside agitators, the final track-laying ceremony and the official signing of the territorial agreements would be moved up. It would happen in 24 hours. The train was coming. The deal was done. Eliza sat in her room, the world gray and muffled. She had missed the stage. She did not care. Let Harrigan arrest her. It did not matter. Night fell. The town was quiet, holding its breath for the ceremony that would seal its fate. Eliza sat in the dark, her bag at her feet. A sound, a small tap at her door. So quiet, she thought she had imagined it. It came again. Tap, tap, tap. She did not move. It was Harrigan. "Come to arrest her." The door creaked open. A shadow slipped into the room. "Eliza." Her heart stopped. She knew that voice. It was impossible. She fumbled for a match, striking it with a shaking hand. The small flame flared up. He was standing there, dripping, his clothes torn, a long purple bruise across his face. His lips were blue with cold, but his eyes were alive, burning with a fierce, desperate light. He was alive. The match fell from her fingers. She crossed the room in 2 steps. She did not know what she was doing. Her hand flew up, and she slapped him, hard, across his bruised face. The sound a sharp crack in the silent room. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice breaking, the first tears of the night finally coming. And then she fell against him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face buried in his cold, wet shirt. She was sobbing, great, racking sobs that shook her entire body. "I thought you were dead!" she cried. "I thought you were dead!" He held her, his arms wrapping around her with a strength she did not know he possessed. He just held her, his face buried in her hair, breathing her in. "I am here," he whispered, his voice rough. "I am here." He had known the river. He had let the current take him, held his breath until his lungs burned, and come ashore a mile downstream. In the darkness, he had hidden, freezing all day, watching the town. He finally, gently set her back. "He took your camera." "Yes," she said, her voice thick. "He smashed it. Daniel, it is all gone. The proof, everything." "No," he said. He reached inside his torn, wet shirt. He pulled out a small, oilskin pouch. From it, he carefully slid one single, unbroken glass plate. "I went back while they were at the bridge. I salvaged one, the most important one." He held it up to the moonlight. It was the ledger page, the one with the X's of the council, and the clear, condemning signatures of Elias Shaw and Lydia Morrow. "We have this," he said. "And Shaw, he is moving the final signing. He is bringing all the paperwork on the train, in his private car, for the ceremony." Eliza's mind, slow and fogged with grief, began to spark. "On the train." "All of it," Daniel said. "The ledgers, the contracts, the final deeds, all in one place, one train car." They looked at each other. The same impossible idea sparked between them. "It is a crazy plan," Eliza said, her voice a whisper. "It is our only plan," Daniel said. "They are having a ceremony. They are not expecting a stampede." He told her his idea, the cattle, the smoke, the steep grade of the track just before the depot. "It is all or nothing," Eliza said. "If we fail, you will be imprisoned. I will be silenced for good." "If we succeed," Daniel said, his hand finding hers in the dark, his grip firm, "the people will finally see the truth." She gripped his hand, the last of her fear burning away, replaced by a cold, sharp fire. "Then let us show them." The day of the ceremony dawned cold and painfully bright. A north wind snapped the new flag strung up along the tracks, the colors too sharp against the pale, dusty sky. A drum beat a steady, hollow rhythm, not a war drum, but a heartbeat for a new machine. Paper confetti, thrown by Elias Shaw's men, scattered and skipped across the dirt, a bizarre, colorful snow in the middle of the parched land. Elias Shaw himself stood on the new depot platform, his voice booming over the crowd. He was a master, his words painting pictures of a shared future, of prosperity brought by steam and iron, of a wilderness tamed for the good of all. The people of Red Butte, bundled in their Sunday best, listened with a mixture of hope and weariness. They wanted to believe. Beside Shaw, Lydia Morrow stood, her dark silk dress unmoving in the wind, her face a polite, frozen mask. Her eyes missed nothing. Eliza Hart moved through the edges of the crowd. She wore a simple, impractical white dress, her hair pinned back. She looked every bit the part of a gentlewoman, perhaps a choir mistress or a school teacher, enlisted to help with the day's events. She even carried a large, empty, borrowed camera box, pretending to line up shots of the speakers, smiling shyly when anyone looked her way. The performance made her stomach churn. Her real cargo was in a heavy carpet bag at her feet. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 3 sticks of old, unstable blasting powder, salvaged by Daniel from a derelict mine shaft. Her job was the diversion. She nodded politely at the banker's wife, stepped around a group of children, and made her way, step by agonizing step, toward the large pile of coal slag and shale near the base of the track's steep grade. Under the cover of setting up her tripod for a scenic shot, she knelt, her hands hidden by her bag. With shaking fingers, she pushed the charges and a long fuse deep into the loose, black pile. It was a safe distance from the crowd, but close enough to the tracks to create the cloud of smoke and dust they needed. She shielded the fuse, lit it with a single match, and walked calmly away. Back toward the platform, her heart a cold, heavy drum in her chest. Further up the slope, hidden in a dry arroyo, Daniel Two Moons sat on his mare. He was not alone. He was surrounded by 200 head of longhorn cattle, a herd belonging to Elias Shaw himself, borrowed from a north pasture an hour ago. He heard the train whistle, long and mournful, from 5 miles out. It was coming. He waited. He watched the crowd below. He saw Eliza, a small figure in white, move away from the slag pile. He saw her look up, just for a second, toward his position. It was the signal. He took a deep breath, tasting the dust. He kicked his mare, riding out of the gully, whistling sharp and high. He fired his pistol into the air. Once, twice. The nervous cattle, already thirsty and agitated, surged. The low rumble became a roar, a wave of brown. Horned bodies poured out of the arroyo and thundered down the long, open slope toward the tracks, toward the ceremony. The crowd heard it first, a vibration in the ground, then a sound like thunder. They turned. Shaw, in the middle of a sentence about public trust, stopped. His eyes went wide. At that exact moment, Eliza's charge went off. It was not a sharp crack, but a deep, concussive thump that shook the depot platform. The slag pile erupted, sending a solid black wall of dust and smoke hundreds of feet into the air. It was not lethal, but it was terrifying. The crowd screamed. The diversion and the threat hit at the same instant. People panicked, pushing, shoving, running away from the stampede, blinded by the choking black cloud. The train, its whistle now a desperate, continuous shriek, locked its brakes, steam hissing as the cattle flooded across the tracks. Chaos. Through the smoke, Daniel rode. He was not a guide, he was a warrior. His mare, trained for hunts, ran with the herd, unafraid. He cut through the cattle, his eyes locked on the last car of the slowing train, the ornate private car, Shaw's office. He rode alongside, the train wheels screeching, throwing sparks. He stood in his stirrups, reached and grabbed the iron ladder on the side of the car. He swung himself from his saddle, his boots finding the rung. His mare, her job done, veered off with the rest of the herd. He was climbing. He needed to get to the coupling. Stop him! Harrigan, the foreman, had not run. He had seen Daniel through the smoke. He ran along the tracks, his face a mask of fury, and leaped, grabbing the same ladder Daniel was on. He grabbed Daniel's ankle, trying to pull him off. Daniel kicked back, his boot connecting with Harrigan's shoulder. He scrambled up to the roof of the car. Harrigan was right behind him. The train had slowed almost to a stop, but the engine, panicked, was now trying to pull away, to escape the herd. The car jolted, throwing both men to their knees. They met on the narrow, swaying roof. It was not a fight, it was a brawl. Harrigan, heavier and stronger, threw a punch that caught Daniel on the jaw. The old scar, his gift from the army, split open. Daniel tasted the hot, metallic tang of his own blood. Eliza, her white dress now gray with soot and dust, ran from the smoke. She saw them, two figures struggling on the roof. She saw Daniel stumble. She saw Harrigan raise his arm for another blow. She was running along the track, scrambling over the spilled coal. "Daniel!" she screamed. She held up the thick leather strap from the camera box she had dropped. It was all she had. She threw it with all her strength. It was a poor throw, but it was enough. The strap landed on the roof. Daniel saw it, grabbed it, and with a sharp, fast twist, wrapped it around Harrigan's wrist, using the foreman's own forward momentum to pull him off balance. Daniel did not stop. He ran to the front of the car, to the heavy iron coupling pin. He gripped the handle, bracing himself, and pulled. The pin was heavy, stiff with grease. He roared, pulling with all his strength. The pin ripped free. The car uncoupled, jolted, separating from the engine. It was free, but it was on a slight downgrade, and it began to roll, slowly, then faster, back toward the depot. "Eliza!" Daniel yelled, scrambling to the side ladder. "Jump!" She ran, her lungs burning, and leaped for the ladder. Her boot heel, wet with mud from the stampede, slipped on the bottom iron rung. She screamed, her body swinging loose, one hand gripping the rail, her feet dangling inches from the massive, moving steel wheels. She was going to fall. Daniel dropped from the roof, landing on the small open platform of the car. He did not have time to think. He threw himself flat, his arm plunging into the space beside the car, and grabbed her. Not her hand, her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh. A grip of iron. The world stopped. The car was rolling. The crowd was screaming. The brakes of the engine were hissing. But all that existed was that connection. His eyes, dark and desperate, locked on hers, which were wide with terror. He grunted, hauling her up, pulling her bodily over the railing and onto the platform, where she collapsed in a heap at his feet. It was not a rescue. It was a raw, physical act of possession. It was a vow made in soot and steel. Harrigan was on the roof again, crawling toward them. Daniel ignored him. He shoved Eliza toward the car's door. "Get inside," he yelled. He threw himself at the brake wheel on the platform. He spun it, his muscles screaming, pouring every last ounce of his strength into the task. The brakes caught, the scream of metal on metal a torture. The car shuddered, smoke pouring from the wheels. It was slowing, but it was still moving too fast. Harrigan leaped from the roof, aiming for Daniel, but the sudden braking threw him off. He missed, his body crashing into the side railing, and he tumbled off the car, landing in a heavy, winded heap in the tall grass. The car jolted, groaned, and with one last shuddering sigh, rolled to a stop. It had not crashed. It sat perfectly in the low, grassy hollow that Daniel had marked, hidden from the main depot by the rise of the land. They were safe. They were alone. Daniel kicked the door open. "The chest," he said, his voice a rasp. They found it, a large, iron-bound footlocker, stenciled Shaw Rail private contracts. It was locked. Daniel, his face bleeding, his chest heaving, lifted the crowbar he had stashed on the ladder. He jammed it into the lock and threw his weight against it. The wood splintered, the hasp ripped free. Inside, gleaming in the dim light, were stacks of ledgers, bound in black and red. They heard the shouting from the depot. The crowd was reforming. Shaw was on the platform. his face purple with rage. "We do not have time," Eliza said, her mind sharp and clear, taking over. She grabbed a heavy ledger. Daniel grabbed 2 more. They ran from the car, not into the hills, but straight toward the depot, straight toward the crowd. "What are they doing?" Shaw bellowed. Eliza did not stop. She ran to a large freight wagon, where a massive white canvas tarp was folded. She pulled at it. "Help me," she yelled to Daniel. They dragged the heavy tarp and strung it up between 2 of the depot's new support beams, creating a huge, white, makeshift screen. "Finch!" Eliza screamed, seeing the young ex-deputy in the crowd. "The lantern! In my hotel room! Get it!" But Finch was already moving. He had seen the plan unfold. He was holding a wooden box, the magic lantern projector. He had saved it from her room. He set it up, lit the lamp. Daniel, standing guard, his face bloody, his arms full of ledgers, looked like a demon of vengeance. Eliza slid the one precious, salvaged glass plate into the projector. The image, 10 feet high, flashed onto the white canvas. The ledger page, the list of names, the X's, and the 2 elegant, damning signatures, Elias Shaw and Lydia Morrow. A gasp went through the crowd. It was silent. "That is my mark," a man's voice called out, shaking with rage. It was a rancher named Peterson. "They told me I was signing a grazing permit." "And me," another shouted. "They said it was a loyalty pledge to the new territory." "He is a liar," Eliza's voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the murmurs. She held up the ledger they had just taken from the chest. "And here is the rest of it. The proof contracts forced on the Northern Cheyenne payments to Deputy Miller. He did not just steal your land. He stole your law." A low, dangerous growl began to build in the crowd. This was not a mob. This was a jury. A figure moved through the parting sea of people. Gray Cedar. He had come. He walked slowly, his face calm, and stood beside Eliza. He did not speak. He did not have to. His presence, standing next to this white woman, this bloody Cheyenne guide, was the most powerful testimony of all. The alliance was real. Elias Shaw, his face pale, saw it all slipping away. He fell back on the only power he had left. He pointed a shaking finger at Eliza and Daniel. "Arrest them," he shrieked at Deputy Miller. "Arrest them now. They are thieves. They assaulted my foreman. That is company property. Do your job." Deputy Miller, his face the color of ash, looked at Shaw. He looked at the giant, illuminated image of his own bribery. He looked at the hard, cold faces of his neighbors, the men he drank with, the men who now knew he was a fraud. He slowly, uncertainly, drew his revolver. He pointed it, his hand shaking, at Daniel and Eliza. The crowd did not move. They just watched. Deputy Miller's hand trembled. The heavy revolver, pointed at Daniel, wavered. The crowd was silent. A single, many-eyed beast, watching him. The projected image of his own name on the ledger, 10 feet tall and illuminated for all to see, was a judgment. He was sweating, his face pale. He was a man trapped between the law he had sworn to uphold and the money he had taken to betray it. A voice, as cold and sharp as new glass, cut the silence. "Put the gun away, deputy!" Lydia Morrow stepped down from the platform. She did not look at Shaw. She did not look at Daniel or Eliza. She looked at the crowd, her face calm, composed, as if she were addressing a courtroom. "Mr. Shaw," she announced, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet, "has forgotten the founding principles of his own company. He has forgotten his partner." She held up a single, folded document, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. "I am the executor of the last will and testament of Arthur Pendleton, Mr. Shaw's original co-founder, who died 5 years ago. I have held this document in trust." Shaw, who had been frozen in rage, now looked at her, his face draining of color. "Lydia, what are you doing?" She ignored him, unfolding the paper. Mr. Pendleton, a man of conscience, insisted on a specific clause. I will read it. Her voice was clear, precise, and absolute. Article 4, as a gesture of peace and in recognition of their prior claim, the lands and water rights of the Willow Draw, specifically the aquifer known as Willow Spring No. 7, shall remain untouched by any rail or cattle development. They are to be held in trust for the sole use of the Northern Cheyenne people, forever. A profound, shocked silence fell over the square. You, Shaw stammered, his voice a strangled whisper. You held that back. You... I did, Lydia said, her eyes finally locking with his, her gaze like ice. I kept it as insurance, against a man I knew to be without honor. I see now that insurance is not enough. Honor must be acted upon. You treacherous! Shaw roared. His composure shattering, he lunged, his hand raised to strike her. But a new voice, raw with fury, bellowed from the edge of the crowd, Traitor! It was Harrigan. He staggered into the square, his face a mask of blood and dirt from his fall. His clothes torn, his eyes were not on Daniel. They were on Lydia, the woman who had just scuttled the entire operation. He ripped a revolver from his belt, his good arm coming up, leveling the barrel straight at her. You, I will. The crowd screamed, surging back, but they did not scatter. They surged around a single, quiet point. They shielded young Finch, who had been standing at the edge, holding a hunting rifle. Harrigan never saw him. He was focused on Lydia, his finger tightening on the trigger. A single shot, a crack that was sharper and louder than any pistol. Harrigan's revolver, as if struck by an invisible hammer, spun from his grasp, clattering uselessly onto the dusty ground. He stared at his empty, stinging hand, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Finch stood where he was, smoke rising from the barrel of his rifle. He did not look angry. He looked calm. He had not lost his badge. He had just earned it back. The momentum was unstoppable. Daniel stepped forward, his bloody face grim. He kicked the iron chest, the lid flying open. He is right, Daniel's voice cut through the air. He held up the real black ledger, the one from the car. Here are the payments. Here is the bribery book. Eliza stepped up beside him. She held up the crude, fake map they had bought from the drunken Absolute man. And this, she cried out, the map his men planted to lead us into a trap to murder us. Then she held up the other one, the precious linen map from the chapel. And this, the real one, the one they murdered my father for. The evidence was complete. The will, the disarmed foreman, the ledgers, the two maps. The crowd was a low, angry growl, a sound on the edge of violence. They were ready to tear Shaw apart. But Gray Cedar, who had been standing by Eliza, raised his hand. The growl subsided. The elder, in his simple blanket, held more authority than the railroad baron, the lawyer, or the men with guns. He bent down, with one long, gnarled finger. He scraped a clear patch in the dust of the square. He drew a circle. He began to speak, his voice quiet, his Cheyenne words flowing into the cold air. Eliza moved to his side, her voice translating, not with heat, but with a quiet, profound respect. The entire town leaned in to listen. He says this is the land. It is a circle. It is whole. Gray Cedar drew lines, branching like veins from the edge of the circle, all leading to a single point in the center. He spoke again. This is the water, Eliza translated, her own voice hushed. It is the blood of the land. It moves in secret. It does not belong to one man. It belongs to the earth. He tapped the center point. Willow Spring No. 7. This is the heart. He says you cannot sell the heart. You cannot sign away the blood. The paper is a lie, because the water itself does not know how to lie. It only knows how to give life. The silence in the square was no longer angry. It was absolute. The ranchers, the farmers, the wives and the children they understood. This was not about deeds or contracts. This was about something ancient. The wind, as if summoned, turned. The crowd turned with it, as one. They looked at Elias Shaw. He was alone. He stood on the platform, his fine suit rumpled, his face pale. Miller had stepped away from him. Harrigan was cradling his broken hand. Lydia was watching him, her face impassive. His power, built on paper and fear and progress, had evaporated into the thin, dry air. He saw the faces of the crowd. He saw their eyes. They were not his subjects. They were his jury. Elias Shaw did the only thing a coward can do when his lies are stripped away. He ran. He leaped off the back of the platform, stumbling, regaining his balance, and sprinting, not toward the hotel, not toward his fine train, but toward the one dark place of industry he still controlled, the old, abandoned coal warehouse, the one at the edge of the ravine. No, Daniel said. He was not letting him escape. He vaulted the platform and ran after him. "Daniel, wait!" Eliza cried, gathering her torn white skirts and running after him. The crowd followed, a moving mass, but they kept their distance. This was an ending they had to witness. Daniel was faster. He reached the black, gaping entrance of the warehouse first, disappearing into the gloom. Eliza was seconds behind him, her heart pounding, fear mixing with a strange, cold clarity. The warehouse was vast and dark, smelling of coal dust and decay. Far at the back, a wide loading door was open to the night, a perfect black rectangle framing the roaring sound of the river in the gorge below. Shaw was there. He stood panting, his back to the void, a cornered animal. As Eliza ran in, he saw his last, desperate chance. He lunged, grabbing her before she could stop. He spun her around, his arm locking across her throat, pinning her arms. He used her as a human shield. "Stay back. 2 moons!" Shaw screamed, his voice high and thin, cracking with terror. He dragged Eliza backward, onto the wide, rickety loading dock that hung over the ravine. The drop was 50 feet to the black, churning water and jagged rocks. "One more step, and I swear, I will take her with me." Daniel stopped, 20 feet away. He had retrieved his revolver from Finch. He raised it, his hand steady, his eyes sighting down the barrel. "Go on," Shaw taunted, his face slick with sweat, his grip tightening on Eliza. "Shoot me, you will hit her." Eliza was rigid. She could barely breathe. "Daniel." Daniel looked at her. He saw her eyes wide with fear, but also with trust. He looked at Shaw, at the pathetic, broken man, his power reduced to this one, last, violent act. He made his choice. He lowered the gun. He opened his hand. The revolver fell from his fingers, clattering onto the dusty wooden floor. "It is over, Elias," Daniel said, his voice calm, reasonable. He held his empty hands up. "Open. Let her go. There is nowhere left to run. The town has seen the truth. They have heard the water speak." "Truth!" Shaw spat, his eyes wild. "I built this town I gave them." A sound from above stopped his words, a deep, agonizing groan, the sound of very old wood, pushed too far. The massive central roof beam, rotten through, strained by the shock of the blast at the slag pile, finally gave way. It did not fall slowly. It crashed down, a black monster, onto the center of the loading dock. It did not hit them, but the impact, the sheer, sudden weight, shattered the ancient, rotting planks beneath their feet. The floor of the dock disappeared. It collapsed into the ravine. Eliza was thrown backward by the force, landing hard on the solid floor of the warehouse. Safe. Shaw screamed. His grip on her was broken. He fell, but his hands, in a last, desperate reflex, caught the one solid plank that remained at the edge. He was hanging, his legs dangling over the black, roaring void, his fingers in their fine leather gloves slipping in the dust. "Help me!" he shrieked, his voice a pathetic cry. "Please help me, I cannot hold on." Daniel was standing right above him. The entire town was now pressed at the warehouse doors. Watching, Finch was there, Lydia was there. They saw it all in the pale moonlight. Daniel looked down at the man who had murdered Arthur Hart. The man who had tried to destroy his people. The man who, seconds before, had threatened to kill Eliza. Shaw's fingers slipped. "Please." Daniel knelt. He reached down, past the splintered wood, and grabbed Elias Shaw by the front of his expensive, ruined coat. With a deep, guttural sound of pure effort, Daniel hauled him up. He dragged him over the shattered edge, pulling his full weight back to safety, and threw him, gasping and sobbing, onto the solid floor of the warehouse. He had saved him, in front of everyone. Shaw lay on the dusty floor, weeping like a child, broken. Daniel just stood over him, breathing hard, his face bleeding, his body taut. The act was complete. Justice, not vengeance. Finch stepped forward from the crowd. He was holding a coil of rope from a freight wagon. He did not ask permission. He walked past Daniel and began to tie Shaw's hands. Shaw did not resist. Lydia Morrow stepped out into the moonlight, the crowd parting for her. She held one of the ledgers taken from the car. She read, her voice clear, formal, carrying over the sound of the river. By the authority of the Territorial Charter and the last will of Arthur Pendleton, co-founder, all contracts concerning the Willow Draw Aquifer are hereby declared null and void. She looked up at the crowd. The Cheyenne Ridge Spur line must be rerouted. The water rights are restored to the Northern Cheyenne people, in full. She looked at the bound, weeping figure of Elias Shaw. And I will be filing charges with the Territorial Marshal for fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. The crowd began to move, to surround Finch and the captured Shaw. They started the long, quiet walk back to the jail. Daniel and Eliza were left alone by the shattered edge of the warehouse. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a bone-deep, profound exhaustion. Eliza was shaking, the reaction taking her. She stepped toward Daniel. He was still bleeding, his shirt torn, covered in soot and blood. She did not throw her arms around him. She just stepped close, inside his guard, and leaned her forehead against his, her eyes closing, her body trembling. Her hand came up, clutching the front of his torn shirt. He could feel the hard, smooth shape of the wooden eagle's nest pressed between them. "You fell," she whispered, her voice thick, the words catching in her throat. "You fell into the river. I thought you were gone." He covered her hand with his own, his skin rough against hers, pressing the small charm into her palm. "But I still heard the wind," she whispered, a single tear finally sliding down her sooty cheek. "And it was still calling your name." The breath Red Butte took was ragged, shaky, and deep. It was the first clean breath the town had taken in a year. The high, thin adrenaline of the confrontation evaporated, leaving behind the grit, the exhaustion, and the sudden, heavy weight of consequence. Elias Shaw was in the town jail, a place built with his own money, weeping into his hands. Harrigan was in the doctor's office, his hand being set, a guard at his door. The Territorial Marshal arrived from Cheyenne 2 days later, a hard, quiet man who listened more than he spoke. He reviewed the ledgers. He reviewed Lydia Morrow's copy of the Pendleton will, and he reviewed the testimony of 20 different ranchers. A temporary court was convened in the saloon, the poker tables pushed aside to make way for a judge's bench. The first act was to place the assets of the Shaw Rail and Cattle Corporation into territorial receivership. The black and red signs were pulled down from the mercantile, the freight depot, and the land office, leaving pale, ghost-like outlines on the wood. The second act was to address young Finch, the town council, their faces grim with the knowledge of how close they had come to ruin, publicly offered him his badge back. Finch, his wife holding his new baby in the front row, pinned it to his chest, He was no longer Miller's boy. He was the town's chief lawman. The third act was the most profound. It was not a legal proceeding. It was a negotiation. Gray Cedar and the Northern Cheyenne Council met with the town leaders. There were no lawyers this time, save for Lydia Morrow, who sat in the back, silent, acting only as a recorder. They did not talk about deeds or sales. They talked about the land. They talked about the drought. They talked about the future. By the end of the day, they had drafted a new agreement, a community memorandum. It guaranteed the sanctity of the Willow Draw Springs. It established shared grazing lands, managed jointly by the council and the Stockmen's Association. It was not a victory of one side over the other. It was an acknowledgement of a shared life. The water, Gray Cedar had said, must feed all who respect it. Lydia Morrow resigned from the Shaw Corporation by telegram that same afternoon. She sold her fine dresses and her train ticket back east. She rented the small, dusty office next to the smithy and hung a new shingle. It read, Lydia Morrow, attorney at law. Her first clients were the ranchers Shaw had defrauded. Her payment a promise to help them reclaim their land. Her first public duty, she had informed the marshal, would be to testify, in detail, against her former employer. Her atonement would be public, and it would be precise. Eliza, in the quiet of her hotel room, finally wrote. The story poured out of her, not in the fiery, accusatory language she had once imagined, but with the clear, cold weight of fact. She wrote of the ledgers, the will, the murder of the mail rider, the murder of her father. She wrote of Daniel's courage, of Finch's conscience, of Lydia's turning. She titled the long dispatch, Willow Draw the Water, the People, the Truth. When she was finished, she packed the pages in the single, precious glass plate. She sent them east with a trusted postal rider. But the map, the beautiful, inked linen map her father had made, she did not send. She kept it, and she made a promise. In her article, she described the sacredness of the spring, the life it gave, and the greed that had nearly destroyed it. But she never once mentioned its location. She had learned, from Daniel, and from the father she was only now beginning to understand, that some truths are not for headlines. Some truths are meant only to be protected. A few days later, after the dust had truly settled, Daniel came to her. He was washed, the cut on his jaw stitched clean, the bruises fading. He wore his own buckskin shirt, the brass badge of Shaw's guard long gone. He held the reins of 2 horses. He did not ask her to come. He just waited. They rode out of Red Butte, leaving the noise and the slow, grinding wheels of the new law behind. They rode west, toward the high ridges, toward Willow Draw. He led her along a path she did not recognize, through the S-shaped canyon he had called the Snake's Mouth, and up into a high, green meadow that seemed impossible in the dry land. The water was there. It did not gush. It seeped, cool and clear, from a cleft of mossy rock, pooling in a deep, quiet basin before sliding into a creek lined with thick, healthy willow trees. The air was cool and smelled of mint and wet stone. "This is it," Daniel said. "Willow Spring number 7. Eliza dismounted, her boots sinking into the soft, damp earth. She looked around, and she saw them. Across the creek, standing like silent sentinels, 3 tall, gray stones, the rocks from the photograph. "He was here," she whispered, her hand going to her throat. "He stood right here." Daniel watched her. He had known this place since he was a child. This was where he had met the kind waterman. "He was a good man, Eliza," Daniel said quietly. "He talked to the water. He understood it." "But he worked for Shaw," she said, the old pain returning. "He found this, and he kept it a secret." "Maybe," Daniel said, "he kept it safe." He walked, not to the spring, but to the base of the largest of the 3 rocks. He knelt, running his hands over the earth. He brushed away pine needles and last year's leaves. He felt a disturbance, a place where the earth was packed harder than it should be. He dug with his hands, then with his knife. He uncovered a rotting oilskin pouch, the same kind he used himself. It was heavy. He handed it to Eliza. Her hands were trembling. She unlaced the leather tie and opened the flap. Inside, wrapped in what was once a clean linen cloth, was a small, leather-bound hydrology journal. She opened it. The pages were stiff, the ink faded but legible. It was her father's neat, scientific hand. He described the aquifer, the flow rates, the purity. He called it the heart of the valley. And then she found the last entry. It was not written in scientific script. It was hurried, the pencil pressing deep. Shaw arrived at the camp today. Her father had written, "He does not see water. He sees money. He sees a weapon to break the Cheyenne. He demanded the map, the coordinates. I told him I had not finished the survey. A lie. God help me, it is the first of many. He will not get this map. If he does, this valley will be filled with blood. There will be a war. I cannot be the man who starts it. I have hidden the map in the old mission. I will tell Shaw the survey was a failure, that the springs are unreliable. He will be furious. He may fire me. He may do worse. But I will not give him the heart of this land. I will not be the cause of so much pain." Eliza staggered, her knees weak. She sat on the damp earth. He was not a partner. He was not a coward. He was a man who had chosen silence, not to protect himself, but to protect others. Harrigan had not murdered him for speaking out. He had murdered him for refusing to speak. "He knew," she whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and clean. "He knew what Shaw was. He tried to stop him. He tried to hide it." Daniel sat beside her, his presence solid, warm. He said nothing. He let her hold the book, let her feel the weight of her father's choice. After a long time, she looked up, her eyes clear. She walked to the edge of the creek. From her pocket, she took a small tallow candle and a match. She lit the candle, the flame small and steady in the daylight. She dripped a small pool of wax onto a flat, dry willow leaf and set the candle in it. Then, she gently placed the leaf on the surface of the water. It floated, a tiny boat of light, and the current took it, carrying it slowly downstream, past the 3 rocks, until it disappeared around the bend. "I understand," she whispered to the running water, to the memory of her father. "I forgive you. I am proud of you." They rowed back in the late afternoon. The land itself seemed changed. Or perhaps she was the one who had changed. She saw it differently now. She saw the new, green shoots on the willow branches. She saw children, northern Cheyenne children, laughing and running by the lower creek bed, their hands muddy, and on a far ridge, dark against the setting sun. She saw them, a small, dark cluster, not cattle. "Bison," Daniel said, a quiet reverence in his voice. "They are coming back. The water is calling them home." That night, they sat on the narrow porch of the small room Daniel kept above the livery. The town was quiet below them, the lights in the windows soft. The air was cold, sharp with the promise of winter, but he had made a pot of strong, bitter coffee, and the steam from the tin cups warmed their hands. They sat for a long time without speaking, the silence comfortable, earned. They had been through fire and water and dust. There was not much left that needed to be said. Eliza looked at her hand, at the calluses forming from the rains. The soot still ground into her cuticles. She thought of her gloves, the ones she had worn when she arrived. They seemed like they belonged to another person, a lifetime ago. Daniel set his cup down. He gently took her hand. He did not say anything. He just held it, his thumb rubbing a slow, absent circle on her palm. It was a gesture of profound, quiet intimacy, a simple claiming. It was not passionate. It was better. It was real. It was a promise of safety, of respect, of being seen. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes closing, the exhaustion of the last week settling on her like a heavy, warm blanket. You know, she murmured, her voice sleepy. That week is over. He was still for a moment. She felt his hand tighten on hers. Yes, he said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. It is. He turned his head, his rough cheek brushing her hair. Eliza, this is not a joke anymore. This is not a game for a week. She turned her face, looking up at him in the dim starlight. This, he said, his gaze steady, is the rest of it. They were married by the water. There was no church, no steeple, only the vast, open cathedral of the Wyoming sky and the sound of the creek sliding over the stones. It was not one ceremony, but two, a weaving of two worlds that had bled for each other and now chose to heal together. First, Gray Cedar stood before them. He did not hold a book. He held a single eagle feather. He spoke in the flowing, quiet language of the Northern Cheyenne, his voice not a command, but a story, a part of the wind. He spoke of the land, how it holds memory, and of the water, how it seeks to join, always, and how Daniel and Eliza, like two different streams, had met in a time of drought and, together, made a new river. He bound their hands, not with rope, but with a simple, long strand of sweetgrass, the sacred scent rising in the cool morning air. He said, "The land has seen you, the water has heard you, your hearts are now one story." Then, after the braid was unbound, Finch stood before them. He was nervous, his new badge polished so bright it hurt the eyes. He represented the other world, the one of paper and law, the one they had fought and redeemed. He read from a small, leather book, his voice gaining strength as he went on. By the authority of the territory of Wyoming, I ask, do you, Daniel Two Moons, take this woman? Daniel, his dark, formal suit strange and familiar at the same time, never looked at Finch. He looked at Eliza. His voice was low. For her, not for the law. I will, he said. And do you, Liza Hart, take this man? Eliza, in a simple linen dress the color of prairie clover, her hands steady, her eyes locked with Daniel's, said, I will. There were vows, spoken quietly, beneath the sound of the wind. They were not the old words of obedience or possession. They were promises of purpose, forged in the fire they had just walked through. Daniel spoke first. I will stand with you, he said, his voice rough. I will guard the truth you find, and I will guard this land, this water, and this people. My heart is your home. Eliza's voice was clear. The reporter's steel softened to a bride's vow. I will stand with you, she replied. I will honor the voice of this community. My words will seek to protect, not just to expose. My heart is your home. The gifts they received were, like the ceremony, of two worlds. Gray Cedar came forward, his wife beside him. They unfolded a large, heavy blanket, woven not just with wool, but with buffalo hair, a deep, rich brown. The pattern was a series of interconnected diamonds, a complex, ancient map of water, of the sacred springs. This is the story of the water, Gray Cedar said as he wrapped it around their shoulders, binding them together. So you will never be cold, so you will never be thirsty. Then, from the town, came the sound of brass. Finch, flushing with pride, waved his arm. The new Red Butte Community Brass Band, 4 men in mismatched shirts, their instruments gleaming, marched up and played a loud, joyful, and stunningly off-key rendition of a popular tune. The ranchers and their wives, the banker, the blacksmith, all the people who had stood in the square and chosen the truth, clapped and cheered. It was a loud, happy, human sound. It was the sound of a community that had found its own voice. Their new life began not in a fine house, but in the old, abandoned rail and cattle land office. The town, in an act of restorative justice, had given them the lease for $1 a year. They scrubbed the floors, washed the ghost of Elias Shaw's name from the windows, and put up new shelves. It became the Red Butte Community Reading Room and School. Eliza, funded by a new contract from her St. Louis paper, which had published her story to national acclaim, shipped in books. She taught reading and writing and history. She taught the ranchers' children, their faces scrubbed, and she taught the Northern Cheyenne children, their eyes wide with a new kind of curiosity. Daniel taught, too. He taught the Cheyenne children their own language, the stories of their people, so they would not be lost. And he taught the white children how to read the land, how to know the wind, how to see the patterns in the grass. He was, in his heart, still a guide. Their greatest tool was the one that had brought them justice. Eliza had sent for a new, finer magic lantern. In the evenings, the community house would be packed. The families of the town and the families from Willow Draw sat together on the floor, their old divisions erased in the shared darkness. Eliza would slide a glass plate into the lantern. "Look," she would say, her voice full of wonder. And a 10-foot-high image of the great bridge in St. Louis would flash onto the canvas. "This is where I am from. This is how men build rivers in the air." Then Daniel would stand, and he would hold up a painted hide, its colors rich in the lantern light. "And this," he would say, his voice resonant, "is the story of how the bison and the people came from the earth. This is where we are from." They were teaching two languages, the language of paper and the language of the land. One evening, months later, as the first cold snap of autumn turned the willows to gold, they sat on the small porch of the community house. The town was quiet. The air smelled of wood smoke and the sharp, clean promise of snow. They were drinking coffee, their hands wrapped around the hot tin cups. The wooden eagle's nest, the small, smooth carving, hung from a leather thong on the rafter above them. It turned slowly, this way and that, a silent messenger, reading the wind. The land was healing. The bison had returned to the lower meadows. The grass, watered by the freed springs, was growing thick again. Justice had not been about revenge. It had not even been about putting Elias Shaw in a federal prison. Though he was there, it had been about this, about the quiet, about the return of the bison, about the water flowing where it was meant to flow, and the people, all the people, finding their right place beside it. Eliza leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. She watched the horizon, a deep, clean purple, free of coal smoke, free of the hard, iron lines of the railroad. It was, for the first time, a horizon of peace. A mail wagon, the new one, rumbled to a stop in the twilight. The driver, a young man who had taken Silas's place, waved. "Daniel, he called. A letter. Came on the afternoon stage. It is from a long way south." Daniel walked out, took the heavy envelope, and brought it back to the porch. He lit a small lantern. The postmark was from the Arizona territory. Eliza opened it. She read the first page, then the second, her brow furrowing. She read it aloud. It was from a man, a farmer in a place she had never heard of. He wrote of a private company, a new dam. He wrote of a river that was disappearing, of fields turning to dust, and of a people, Pima and Maricopa, who were thirsting. He wrote, "They told us your name, Miss Hart. They said you know how to fight men who steal water." She finished the letter. The wind sighed through the willows. The eagle's nest turned. She folded the pages and looked up at Daniel. He was already watching her, his face calm in the lantern light, his eyes clear. He knew. He nodded. Once, a slow, steady acknowledgement. "Our next story," Eliza said, her voice quiet, not with weariness but with resolve. He reached out, his hand covering hers, the rough, warm skin, a familiar anchor. He pulled her closer, his gaze moving from her face to the darkening valley, to the free horizon. "Be my sweetheart for a week," he murmured, his voice so low it was almost lost in the wind. I joked. He looked down at her, a small, true smile touching the corners of his mouth, the scar on his jaw soft in the light. "But I will never," he said, his voice full of a tenderness that was more real than any iron rail. "Joke about your heart again? Not for all my life." Thank you so much for listening to this story from Wild West Tales. We would love to connect with all of you. So please comment below and let us know where you are listening from. And subscribe to the channel, like this video, and give us a boost by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.